All right. So this is where we finished our discussion on the different types of serial murderers. So we have, we talked about vision and then the mission category, no, excuse me, not category types. So just a refresher, remember vision is someone who is typically disorganized, um, asocial offender, typically will have some type of hallucinations and views it as a vision from someone else, of a higher authority or a different authority, such as Satan, demons, God, or some some other force that we are unaware of, essentially. Okay, um, they tend to, since it is a thing that they feel like they are told to do, it is viewed as a job and it's a quick kill. The it's There's not really going to be anything exciting about it for them. It's just something, basically a task for them to do because they feel like they're being told to do it. Excuse me. Uh, and that's essentially, like I said, that's kind of where we stopped with vision. Mission was more so uh, where the person comes up with it on their own. They are fully aware of their decision to do this. They're fully conscious of what they're wanting to do. Uh, and even though they see it as a job and will also have a quick kill, remember that's the difference between vision and mission. Is vision comes from some type of visual or auditory, basically hallucination, as opposed to mission, where the individual himself or herself, but it's typically a male, will come up with their own idea of people that should be eradicated or killed. So typically organized. There are some disorganized, but most of them are organized. So moving on from those two, I want to go ahead and talk about what will be hedonistic, which hedonistic has two subtypes. So I want to be make sure that we distinguish between those two. So the first one we're going to talk about is probably the one that most people, when they think of serial killers, especially the more famous ones, this is kind of where they go. It's a lust or thrill kill. And this is kind of, well, to be honest, this is whenever the uh, FBI, back when they had like the first thing they called the behavioral science unit, but now behavioral analysis, they basically named it as, lust and thrill killers. That was what they assumed most of the people did. But these are the types that, I'm going to go ahead and pull all these out. So um, they don't kill because they are being called to do it. They don't, or anything like that. It's simply a desire that they have, and they enjoy, and there's a level of sexual gratification that comes with harming someone else, not killing them, but it's the process of harming and uh, hurting someone else. It's not sadistic necessarily, um, but it's definitely closer to sadistic, and can be a part of what hedonistic lust or thrill killers do. So basically, lust or thrill killers, they will want to keep their victims alive for longer. They will eventually kill them. Okay, but it's kind of like that cat that takes that mouse and just plays with it, and um, except it's worse with a serial killer because they aren't sharpening any skills. They're just messing with people, and they love to see that that they have control over someone's life and death, essentially. But they typically, as you can read here, they like the idea of personal violence. The more they can harm someone physically and still keep them alive for a little while, the longer they can, the better. For example, Andrea Chikatilo, the Russian serial killer that I know some of you have for your for your presentation. He enjoyed, for instance, he had, if you want to go back into his background, he had some issues with relationships in terms of the opposite sex. He struggled with that. He even tried to, when he was, if you want to say, middle aged or whatever, he tried to be sexually active. He tried to be sexually active when he was younger. Didn't work out well for him because he couldn't perform. And then he also later on tried to um, become, sexually active or sexually um, abuse and assault younger. I say younger, like say 15-year-old girl, and then it got younger from there. But either way, still didn't work. But what he did find out throughout due to the frustration, he ended up having a knife and stabbed this uh, female, and he ended up getting gratification from the blood and from her reaction to being stabbed. Plus, to him, he viewed the knife as being basically like very similar to his penis because it was penetrating his victims. So therefore, he actually got aroused by doing that. So he also later on he dismembered some of his victims and ate part of their flesh and things like that. But I did want to point out that that's something else that goes along the lines of that personal connection between violence, sexual gratification. So there is an erotic side to them that enjoys that process of killing someone, or like they can. Um, it's the process of actually of killing someone that excites them. Okay, it's not a whole bunch of other stuff. It's just the homicide itself. Very process focused, as you guys can see there. And so that's why, because these two right here are connected. The process and the homicide itself, that's what they're after. That is what gets them going. That is basically where they get their sexual gratification, is from, whether it be from the blood, whether it be from however they're killing that person. They know, that the idea of killing that person, in the process of killing that person, is something that is arousing to them, and they want to continue that process as much as they can, even with each individual. That's why that's why they like to keep their victims a little bit longer, or have a place to take them to where they won't be, or much less likely to be stopped, or someone interrupt. Okay, so no mental illness. Now, be aware that's kind of I think there's some mental issues with thinking that way, but what they're saying is there's no major history of, say, schizophrenia, or say bipolar disorder, or anything along those lines. There may be some other smaller mental issues, but for the most part, there's no major mental illness that's causing this. So, once again, they prefer slow kills because that's, it goes back to this whole process focus. They don't care about the person so much. They can depersonalize that person. That's their goal, is to depersonalize. They just love the process of actually killing somebody. So that's what they're after, and they like to make it last. They love it when the victim is helpless. So screaming, struggling, fear, things like that excites them. Okay. And they are typically organized because it does take more time to actually set up this whole idea of how you're going to get someone in a situation to where you can gain control of them, and to where you can have your whole fulfill your fantasy or process that you're going through. So, for example, Jeffrey Dahmer fits into this category pretty well, simply because he had it planned out. He knew what types of men he was going for, um, and he would go to in essence, the gay clubs, typically but try to find um, typically black, occasionally Hispanic, but usually black males who would be willing to go back to his place, drink, potentially use drugs. But ultimately, what you don't understand, but what people forget about or don't know about, is it wasn't like he killed them immediately. Sometimes he would try to keep them alive. Like at one point in time, he tried to find a way. In his mind, he thought maybe he could create some type of chemical concoction that he could inject into these different men to keep them keep them physically alive to where they wouldn't would function as far as, yes, they're alive, but he could use them pretty much as like sex toys. So like he tried to put acid in their skulls. He tried that one time. Didn't work because ended up killing the person. Shocker there. But then he also was known to, before he disposed of the bodies or dismembered them, because I don't want to get into all his different details on how he got rid of his bodies, because he had a few different ways that he tried. But while he still had some of those bodies that were just kind of hanging out, he would still go back and have sex with them or with the corpse. He would still, he had this whole process where he wanted to try to keep, like I said, if he could keep that person alive, but he liked the idea of eventually killing them. But he wanted to kind of keep them alive throughout the whole process. So, all right, trying to think of anybody else that I want to take the time to go into. And nothing's really coming to mind right now. So we'll go ahead and move forward, because I know that we are getting close to where we need to move on. So the next one, or this next thing, okay, some stuff I did mention with the hedonistic. They love to or like to participate in things like, I already mentioned, dismemberment. John Wayne, Jeffrey Dahmer, definitely dismemberment, cannibalism. Andre Gigatillo, another example of that. You had, let's see, Edmund Kemper did some dismemberment. And another one would be Ted Bundy. He didn't really dismember them, but he did have, participate in necrophilia. A lot of them that did torture. You have Dennis Rader, one of the biggest names in terms of torture, mutilation, but especially torture. Actually, this particular person did, tortured, dismembered, and in some cases mutilated bodies. Didn't have any affiliation with necrophilia, but H.H. Holmes was definitely hedonistic, because he did, as this little list here, participated in all but necrophilia. So yeah, he's definitely on that list. So let's move on. Domination, fear activities. Once again, it's usually stabbing. It's usually hands-on. Hedonistic killers like to be hands-on. Power and control like it more, but nonetheless. So hedonistic, here's a difference real quick I want to point out. A little thing to, if you're doing a profile or thinking about it, think about it this way. I don't want to get too far ahead and get into power and control too early, but think about hedonistic as they enjoy the process of killing somebody because they like the idea of death and everything else. But the weapons what they choose to use may involve their hands, but a lot of times it'll be items that they can use. They may be handheld items, but they are more like, say, knives. That's probably stabbing someone or occasionally choking or suffocating to death, but it's usually, say, stabbing, that type of thing where they know they can inflict that on someone else and they can still dominate and cause fear for someone. For example, Dennis Rader or BTK loved the idea of being able to basically have control over someone else's life. But trying to think of a better example for you in terms of domination and fear. Let's see here. We had one. It's actually a group, or not, well, technically, yeah, it is a group, but it was more so a partnership with Charles Ang and Leonard Lake. They worked together, and in fact, Leonard Lake's wife was part of it, even though whenever it came down to Prosecution, she was basically granted immunity, which I don't understand all of that as far as why she was, but yeah, they would get people in different manners is how they abducted people, but nonetheless, families or people, individuals, whatever, and um, keep them there. Eventually, the women became, for lack of better terms, sex objects, sex slaves, in essence. Usually, the males or husbands were murdered. Usually after there was some form of torture of the guy, as well as making the husband uh, watch the two men, especially Leonard, though he was the one who was more so in control. Um, but they would watch them, make those men watch, say Leonard uh, rape their wives, and they made videos of that. A bunch of other things. They would kill babies, and they don't know for sure whether it really happened or not. But there's also reason to believe that some of the babies were actually um, cooked in some way. So either way, that's something else to look at. So otherwise, this is where I want to stop, and I will get into comfort-oriented hedonistic in the next video. I'll see you then.